Hi, Pascal.
As you man.
Hi. Great. So let's get started. I'm happy to have with me today Pascal Ricord, who will join us to speak on today's topic, which is, do you have a narcissistic manager? Pascal is a certified business and psychosocial counselor. He inspires through his podcasts, motivation talks, and business coaching. He helps companies by improving managers' self-awareness, discover their hidden abilities, change mindsets, and increase authenticity. Looks like we share a common passion. Welcome, Pascal.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for inviting me. And I see at the participants a lot of known faces. So happy also I see those participants as well. So thanks you again, Suman, for inviting me for this talk.
Great. So, it's an interesting topic. So let's start by answering what is narcissism? So, Pascal, how do you see it?
Well, narcissism, if you have a look, it's about love of the self, right? So it's about really, on the one hand, if you look at the definition narcissism, it's about putting yourself in a place where you take control over your own things. So it's about actually also an essential component of the self-esteem. And that is exactly the part where it comes to a place that narcissism, everyone has it a little bit inside them. If you post something in LinkedIn, then most probably you will be happy if someone likes. Most probably you will be happy if someone gives a comment onto it. And most probably if 10,000 people likes it, you will be a bit more happier than if 5 people are liking it. So you could say at that particular part, you have actually a certain narcissistic behavior. And in a certain way, this is correct. But the question is, of course, okay, how is that during the whole day? How is that something you need constantly? And what are you actually doing for having this? Are you just a person who wants to do that and get an action? Or are you willing to go to a certain way where on purpose you're gonna emotionally start suppressing others so that you can achieve something? And this then goes, of course, in a complete different direction. And then we can
Right.
talk about different levels, right? So, yeah, that's my point of view. Suman, what's your point of view on this whole narcissism as is?
I'm very passionate about emotional intelligence, but hadn't really delved much into narcissism earlier. But as I learned more, it's interesting. I found it seemed like the opposite of EQ, right? Because EQ talks of self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, relationship. It seems that people who are narcissists are low on all of them. Like, let's start with self-awareness. Narcissistic people typically have an inflated sense of their own importance, right? There was very strong, a very deep need for admiration. In fact, I would say more than admiration. They really want adulation, right? They want to be looked up to. They are not open to feedback. They can be vulnerable to the slightest criticism. Self-regulation, again, not a strong point, right? They can throw fits of anger. They show very high confidence, but this ultra confidence, high confidence that they portray it's like a facade. I mean, there is, behind all that, there is a very fragile self-esteem. Uh, so self-regulation is low. Empathy, we all know, like people who are narcissistic, they have very little regard for other people's feelings. And usually they're poor listeners. And I think where it stems from is the belief that they're special, right? They're somewhat superior to others. They have a sense of entitlement, and that's what probably gives them low empathy. And finally, because of all this, they don't build emotional connects, right? That's somehow they're emotionally isolated. They're most superficial. Yes, they will build a connect, but when it will help them, right? So I found that all these aspects, they definitely score low on EQ. So that's my take.
Yeah, you summarize it quite correct, right? Of course, you have different subtypes, right? So
Yes.
not every narcissist is a grandiose narcissist. You have actually 7 major subtypes, but
Yeah.
you're completely correct that in a point of view, most of them through the outside are showing or giving the impression that they are more and that they are more stable. But like you said, deep inside, they are quite wounded because there is something which happened in the childhood, most probably, a
Yeah.
certain behavior in this age where they actually had where they did not develop themselves on a certain way between in an age of 2 and 4 years, where this
Hmm.
narcissism is a very important part. And because of that, then they came to narcissism, right? And it can be
Okay.
different ways, right? It does not have to be abusive. It does not have to be that the mother was jealous and telling everything to the kid. It can be all kind of reasons why someone then is developing some narcissistic traits. But
Yeah.
there is something what happened in that period, most probably between 2 and 4.
Right. Right. Interesting. Yeah. So there is a lot of subtext and a lot of, baggage that comes with you that makes you the person you are. Great. So I think,
What
the
the
topic is how.
thing as well. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'd lost you in between. Just say that part again.
I said the interesting remark from Shail concerning the conversation about ego versus shadow. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I think, since the topic is, do you have a narcissistic manager? Let's talk quickly about how do you recognize a narcissistic behavior, right? Sometimes, it's very difficult to also understand, and as you said, we all have it in us. It's just a matter of how intense it is. And I think we've talked about quite a few of them already. But, if I ask if I ask people that, hey, had you had a manager who's kind of insensitive, right? That's a clear sign. Did you have a manager who likes to hear themselves talk and they talk mostly about themselves? They like to steal the spotlight. That's also a sign of narcissism. Somebody who's quick to judge, criticize, ridicule, all of those, some of those negative behaviors. At the same time, if you give them feedback, they're very sensitive to criticism, right? If you do a good job, they're very reluctant to give you credit. It's almost like if by giving you credit, it'll diminish their power, their star power, right? So uh, they're very stingy with it, right? Or even worse, you give them some idea and they steal credit for it, and suddenly you hear people say, "Hey, it was the boss's idea," when it was not. It was your idea. So, like that, I think these are clear signals that there are narcissistic tendencies that the manager is displaying. So, given that, Pascal, how do you go around that? I mean, how do you maneuver that? How do you set clear boundaries?
Mm. Well, if you talk about like one type of narcissist, if you talk about a grandiose narcissist, right? So mostly
Hmm.
at the beginning, this is a person who wants to have control all time, and this person
Right.
gonna test you. You can
Yeah.
have a look a little bit like a kid in school who wants to test the teacher to find out how far they can go. And
Mm,
this they
mm,
also
mm.
going to do with actually new employees, with new colleagues, with a new person in the life which they're going to encounter. And by testing, they're going to test on certain areas. One of the things they're going to test is in a test on a certain lie. So it can be that on purpose they're going to lie to you, and they lie to you about something where they know that you know that they're lying about. So on purpose,
Mhm.
they're gonna get a topic where they know that the truth is a different one, and they may be gonna say from I finished this project, or I was in charge of that project, and you know that actually that person was not in charge, or definitely was not the main part of this project.
Mm.
And actually, the narcissist person knows that as well, that you know that. And they're going to on purpose do that to see how you react on that. If you're not reacting on that, if you're just staying it like It's like you are accepting and you're telling to that person, it's okay that in your face you're lying to me. I totally agree with this kind of a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So at that moment, it is to you that you say from, sorry, I thought that this project, that actually this colleague did this project, or that was the person who got this big deal inside the company. So that you actually encounter and that you tell that person from, well, I actually know that the truth is a different one. So this is one thing that they're gonna do. It's on purpose tell a lie. Another thing what they're gonna do quite fast is actually they're gonna over compliment. So they're gonna give you a compliment even if they don't know you exactly. It can be that they're gonna say from, I never have seen someone who's so accurate in doing this or that. And it's about testing from, okay, how if they give this kind of behavior, how do you react on this or that? Not. Do you like it if you get this kind of a compliment? Again, it's up to you then, where you say from, well, thank you for this information, but knows from my knowledge, I know that there are other colleagues who also are very good in this or that. So that you clearly tell to that person, well, I'm also just a human and I'm not like a god, right?
Yeah.
And a third thing that quite often they're going to do is do the opposite already from the beginning and giving a certain criticize you. So it can be that they're going to say a little thing, maybe even indirect, that they say, yeah, I've noticed during that presentation that this or that you did, and then there was this reaction from the team. And if you just stand like that, if you just say it like this, then again, you're telling to that person, it's okay that you criticize me. And they're going to do it very smoothly and very cheeky, let me say that way, from the beginning. And then, of course, within time, it's going to become more and more obvious. So the faster that you actually can set borders and the faster that you say from, well, I see that different, the faster it's actually going to help you. It can be, for instance, man to woman, that the man going to say to a woman, you look actually very beautiful how you're dressed, but your shoes, really? Did you have to take those red shoes? Couldn't you have taken other shoes? Just from the very beginning, right? And if you're just staying like that, if you're not answering on this, then you're actually telling to that person, I agree to you that you're giving me this kind of a compliment, not compliment, a criticize, right? So at that moment for you, it's like setting clear border and say, well, thanks a lot for this feedback that you don't like my shoes, but I love my shoes. Right? So that you clearly say from, I don't care what you think about it. For me, it's totally fine. Yeah, so this is actually kind of boundaries that you can set from the beginning, right? So
Okay. Yeah, so that's interesting. It's almost like, they're very high on EQ. They're testing you. They're cheeky. They're doing it smoothly. They're manipulative, right? So a lot is at play.
Yes. And how about you, Suman? How you see that? Do you see it always as a negative point of view on a narcissism?
That's a great point. I think, like you mentioned, there's a grandiose narcissism, right? So that's the negative one. So often when we hear the word narcissism, we think of it as a negative, but it's not always negative, right? So some of those characteristics of what narcissists have can be actually very positive. And that's why you see a lot of narcissistic leaders leading companies, right? They have a great ability to attract and inspire others. They're quite visionary, they're charismatic, they're highly independent, they're very high EQ, like we talked about it, right? So they're visionary, they can strategize, they innovate, all of those things. And the other thing is they also take on huge challenges, right? Because they are able to see the big picture, they find the meaning in their cause, and they have the courage to push through huge transformations. They're big risk takers. And they have a lot of charisma. Typically, narcissistic people have a lot of charisma. So, and they use their charisma to get things done. And that charisma also includes great oratory skills, right? So they also can communicate very well. So if you go back and look at a lot of these so-called superstar CEOs, right, who are household names, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Andy Grove, Jack Welch, to some extent, they were highly narcissistic. Uh, Good example is one of Jack Welch, right? So uh, in this book called The Leadership Engine, Noel Tichy actually argues that Welch formed his company's leadership culture through teaching. But what he meant by teaching was basically, indoctrinating people of his personal ideology, right? So rather than creating a dialogue, right, he would make pronouncements, right? He would say, hey, we need to be number one or number two company in the world, or you get out, right? It made them very famous, but end of the day, it was about them, right? He would institute a program saying, let's do Six Sigma, and it becomes a buzzword, right? Now, the strategy has been very effective, right? But he really fits into the definition of a narcissistic leader very well. It's like internalize my vision or you leave. It's like either you're with me or you're out, right? So it's all a lot about that person. And like that, we have a lot of other examples. Would you agree with that? What's your view?
Um, yeah. I think looking at the statistics, in a management level, you have more managers and an average who have narcissistic traits compared with non-managers. And it's like you said, right? Because they also have the ability to actually never give up. And sometimes also, yeah, by thinking only about themselves, let me say that way, then they have, of course, a certain way that they make decisions, and sometimes makes then harsh decisions where they don't have so much issue with the emotional part because they have on a certain level lack of empathy, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, not everyone has, of course, a narcissistic personality disorder. So what I've learned during the whole, and I see Charlie also want to mention something, so I give then the word to him. Luckily, what I've seen in the years is that by changing your own behavior and by changing how you react on things, you actually can have a much better and much smoother communication with a person who has narcissistic traits. And for me, that is the most important thing. And for me, I don't care if this person would on a level be or having a narcissist personality disorder or not, or if I see that this person only has one or two narcissistic traits. The most important thing is that you see how this person is and that you learn how to deal with that person. And by dealing differently with that person, that actually you can have another way of communicating. And like you said, it's also about learning. It's about learning how you can grow from observing someone else, because like you say, they are masters in, for instance, argumenting. They are masters in having the right network connections. And this is something which you can look not from a point of view of frustration or jealousy or something like that, but more from the point of view of, okay, this is actually something that I can learn and that I can grow myself.
I think that's a
Shahil,
great
you wanted
point.
to mention something?
Yeah. Hi, guys. Hope everyone's having a good
Hi.
day.
Hi.
Couple of things. First is I try to look at narcissism and NPD like we brought up. It's a medical condition, right? So let's go a little away from that, go a little bit into the abstract side of things. If narcissism, we recognize traits of it, then we also know what the opposite of narcissism should be. And people have written about this. It's called an empath or an egoist, right? Now, once you have the scaling in front of you and you understand both the ends, it becomes slightly easier to place people on the spectrum to know, like, oh, where do their tendencies lie? Now, I would also say, since we're talking about this in a very professional and hierarchical setting, because the word manager is, a manager will have their bosses as well, and they will have people under them. it's important to make the observation on both sides. How do they treat their juniors and how do they treat their seniors? Being narcissistic in that negative sense, the one that we all hate, has particular traits. But sometimes when people appear narcissistic, and in my opinion, every manager is slightly narcissistic, what happens is if they're not coaching you and mentoring you, that's not a relationship worth having or building upon, right? Because you have to dedicate time, effort, money, blood, sweat, tears to this entire equation. Now, that to me is the most important trait, right? I'm being narcissistic and selfish when I say that myself, that, hey, I am here for a very selfish reason of becoming better. And as long as that, for me, that condition is met and the right, credit is given where it's due, like this is where this junior senior thing comes in, then I think it's a fair deal in today's day and age.
So I think I'd like to comment on two things. So one is how they respond to not just bosses but juniors. Because of lack of empathy, I think one thing that we also notice is while they tend to act superior, something which gives them an entitlement and edge with their juniors, the opposite happens when they're sometimes talking to somebody above them, right? So they would act subservient, right? They would act inferior. And we've seen people like that. And, it's like two-faced. You're sometimes wondering, hey, this guy's so bossy, but when he's in front of his boss, he's like a mouse, right? And I think they do it because they have high IQ. They do it because to serve their own purpose. They know that that's going to help them go ahead, move forward, get ahead in their career. So, yeah. And I think coming back to what Pascal was saying, that's very important. Sometimes it's very difficult to work with such people. But having said that, I think it's a lot about us. We need to kind of distinguish that, yes, while it's difficult to work, there is also a lot we can learn from them. I think that's about our own mindset, right? So if you are able to kind of ignore that part, the irritating part, I think there is a lot we can learn also from them. But this changeover is very interesting to me, from what we talked about, the positive things, which is really productive narcissism, to moving to grandiose narcissism. I think what happens is the success, as these guys get successful, that sows the seed for their downfall eventually, right? So more success, more self-assured, they're more spontaneous. The more they think they're invincible, they take more risks, they listen even less, they ignore others who are trying to get closer, which causes further isolation. If left unchecked, it can actually self-destruct. And we've seen people like that who have been extremely brilliant, but eventually they self-destruct. Yeah.
I think one of the main, what I observed in all the years, one of the main things that narcissists have a big issue with is that at the end, they have very difficulties to work together with someone. Because at the end, they are jealous about quite a lot of persons. And they are also jealous about their manager as well. And like you said, even if the manager is the manager, it can be that on a certain way, they're going to be very soft to them. But on another way, towards colleagues and towards their employees, it can be that they even are starting gossiping about the manager as well. And they're definitely going to start gossiping or showing that they're not respecting their colleagues and their employees. Now, the problem is that the moment they get older, that sooner or later, those employees and those colleagues are suddenly become managers or suddenly become very important. And it's that moment that then suddenly they notice that they have not support at all anymore from the others because they are not there anymore. And that's something which I learned through the years, privately and business-wise. If you deal with narcissists, that at the end they are standing very, very alone, because they always have the methodology that whoever they meet on a certain way and at a certain moment, they're going to start having discussions with them, and that's going to lead to something difficult.